Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this June 23rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. For our opening story tonight, ABC World Affairs editor John Simpson reports from Baghdad.
Flash photography.
The Iraqi forces are fighting back. After the recent collapse of the Iraqi army, these pictures seem to show greater determination, and it's clear from other evidence that they're starting to be successful in taking back territory which ISIS had previously occupied. Still, ISIS has scored further successes just today. It's taken over more border crossings, and it's surrounding a major hydroelectric dam near the town of Haditha. So this is the position that John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, came to Baghdad to confront. The atmosphere when he met the Iraqi Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, wasn't entirely friendly. Mr. Maliki thinks the Americans are deliberately not doing enough to help. Mr. Kerry wants Mr. Maliki to step down, or at least to widen the basis of his government.
It is essential that Iraq's leaders form a genuinely inclusive government as rapidly as possible within their own constitutional framework.
The most Mr. Kerry's probably got out of this visit is an undertaking from Mr. Maliki that he'll broaden his government to bring in more Sunni politicians. It's the feeling among Sunnis that they've been excluded from power which has turned many of them into supporters of ISIS.
We would like a new government as well, but it's not the Maliki to stand down. We support al-Maliki. If the parliament decides something else, this is a democratic country. So we believe in democracy, we believe in the will of people.
This is the way ISIS likes to present itself. In this case, the pictures are from the city of Mosul, which they captured 2 weeks ago. ISIS fighters are handing out copies of the Quran. They aren't unbeatable, but it'll take full American help if the Iraqi government is to win back places like Mosul. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
And friends, John Kerry is in this next piece of video news. Interesting that he goes over there and tells the leader, he wants the leader to step down. I mean, and they're running a democracy. I mean, what if somebody come over here and told the President of the United States they want him to step down? I wonder what John Kerry would have to say about that. But in this next video, John Kerry says Iraq's future depends on choices of the next days.
The very future of Iraq depends on choices that will be made in the next days and weeks. And the future of Iraq depends primarily on the ability of Iraq's leaders to come together and take a stand united against ISIL. Not next week, not next month, but now. The support will be intense, sustained, and if Iraq's leaders take the necessary steps to bring the country together, it will be effective. It will allow Iraqi security forces to confront ISIL more effectively and in a way that respects Iraq's sovereignty while also respecting America's and the region's vital interests. The Strategic Framework Agreement also commits the United States to support Iraq's constitutional process. That is specifically stated. And that is part of why I stressed in today's meetings the importance of keeping the constitutional timeline and of forming a new government as soon as possible, because forming a new government is critical to the ability of Iraq to be able to make progress and be successful.
Okay, well, there's one man's opinion, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. He also was involved in news out of Egypt, where U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry described the sentences that have come down from there today, basically 7-year jail sentences. He described them as chilling and draconian in this video with Christian Fraser reporting from Cairo.
The defendant's cage. Inside, Australian Peter Grester and 2 Al Jazeera colleagues, desperately hoping this ordeal is about to end. The judge had sat through 12 hearings of this trial, which Amnesty International dismissed as a vindictive farce. The verdicts then, all the more shocking.
Peter Grester بالسجن المشدد
Guilty.
7 سنين.
7 years for Peter Grester, repent behoove.
Peter's parents watching a live feed in Australia.
My God. My God. I'm sorry.
Of 20 people on trial, only 2 were acquitted. The rest, most of them tried in their absence, were given 7 to 10-year sentences. In court, the families reacted with disbelief.
6 months is long enough. 7 years is absolutely ridiculous.
For the families, this is the verdict they had feared, but probably expected. And no wonder the prisoners shout in anguish. From here, they'll be taken back to the cell that they've shared for the past 6 months. It's 3 metres by 4 metres, just a small window and 3 beds. And they're in lockdown for 23 hours a day.
This was the night of the arrests in late December, and a recording of the raid on the Marriott hotel room where the Al Jazeera journalists were working. Peter and the Cairo bureau chief Mohammed Fahmy, sitting next to him, were charged with spreading false news in support of the banned Muslim Brotherhood. For 6 months, the international media has run a huge campaign in their support. But in the absence of any real evidence, it seems certain this case was part of the wider diplomatic row between Egypt and the Gulf state Qatar, which owns Al Jazeera and has backed the deposed Islamist president Mohammed Morsi. Outside court today, Mohammed Fahmy's mother said her son is merely the scapegoat.
I'm so angry. If they could find any one single evidence, okay, we can say, okay, anyone do anything should take the punishment. But he didn't. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything.
From here, the appeals process is a long road. There can be no presidential pardon until the legal battle is exhausted. Christian Fraser, BBC News, Cairo.
Okay, thank you, Christian Fraser in Cairo. We also have a report from Cairo from Bethany Bell on this same story.
A lot of shock, I'm sure. People had been hoping that there would be an acquittal in this case. Peter Grester and his colleagues had said that they were innocent of all the charges against them. From the courtroom, from the cage in the courtroom where they were being held in their white prison uniforms, Peter Grester hit the side of the cage when he heard the verdict. His colleague, Mohammed Fahmy, who's a Canadian-Egyptian, had to be dragged from the cage, shouting. This is something that they had really hoped that they would get an acquittal, because they say they are not guilty of any of these charges.
And Baha Mohammed also getting an additional 3 years on separate charges.
Yes, we understand, because he was said to possess a bullet case, and for that he's been given an extra 3 years. Some of the students who were also on trial in this trial, 2 of them have been acquitted, but certainly 7-year sentences for Peter Grester and his 2 colleagues. Now, it all goes to show that while there has been a tremendous amount of international concern about this case and the questions it raises for freedom of the media in Egypt here it's seen in a very different way. The media have presented it in Egypt as a question of the national interest. The Al Jazeera they presented as an enemy of the state in their support for the now banned Muslim Brotherhood, which was declared to be a terrorist organization back in December.
And friends, in our next video, still on this same subject, Australia's Foreign Minister Julie Bishop has said Australia is shocked that the Egyptian court has convicted 3 Al Jazeera journalists and sentenced them to 7 years in jail.
The Egyptian government's response to date has been that it is an independent judicial process and that we must respect the independent judicial process. Now, in the case of Australia, we would say, yes, we do respect the independence of the judiciary. However, we are shocked by this verdict. We are deeply disappointed that a court could come to this decision, and quite frankly, we simply do not understand how a court could have come to this decision based on the evidence of which we were aware. And the representatives of the Australian government in Cairo have attended the court hearings. We have had debriefings after every hearing. There have been, including today, 13 hearings. We have been in constant contact with Peter Grest and his lawyers and his family, and we simply cannot understand how a court could come to this conclusion.
Minister, some of the supporters of Peter Grest and his colleagues have expressed frustration through this whole period. They've said they didn't think the Australian government was doing enough, soon enough and publicly enough. What do you say to those people? Do you think you accept the independence of the Egyptian judiciary and the arguments coming from Egypt too readily? Should you have done more sooner? Would it have made any difference, do you think?
I query what they suggest we should have done. Personal phone calls between the Prime Minister of Australia and the President of Egypt are not common occurrences in relation to a single court case. I have had 4 conversations, one-on-one personal conversations with the relevant Egyptian Foreign Minister, the former and now the current. I have spoken personally to the Deputy Foreign Minister. Our Attorney General has contacted the Minister for Justice in Egypt in the previous government. We have made contact with the Ambassador. Our Ambassador in Cairo, Dr. Ralph King, has been constantly in touch with the special prosecutor, with whatever level of government he's been able to make contact. I have been in contact and had meetings, one-on-one meetings, with a range of ministers in other governments, asking them to make representations on our behalf. I cannot think.
Friends, you can see that the sentence that came out today, 7 years for those 3, has caused some grave concerns. Now, these stories you've just been hearing are all from today's news. Now, in yesterday's news, the United States has revealed that it has released $575 million. That would be 338 million pounds in military aid to Egypt that had been frozen since the ousting of President Mohamed Morsi last year. The news came as Secretary of State John Kerry visited Cairo just 2 weeks after former Army Chief Abdul Fattah al-Sisi was sworn in as president. After talks with the new leader, Mr. Kerry stressed the importance of upholding the right of all Egyptians. Now, I have a scripture we're going to go over with you on that comment that Mr. Kerry makes after you hear him make it yourself in this video.
After 3 difficult years of transition, the United States remains deeply committed to seeing Egypt succeed. We want to see the people of Egypt succeed, and we want to contribute to the success of Egypt. As President Obama told President al-Sisi after his inauguration, we are committed to working together to fulfill the full promise of Egypt's 2011 revolution and to support the political and economic and social aspirations of the Egyptian people, as well as their universal human rights. I reiterated that message in each of my meetings today as part of a broad and a very constructive discussion of the issues, including Israeli-Palestinian relations, Egypt's return to the African Union, and confronting the shared threats of terrorism and extremism. I want to thank President al-Sisi for a very candid and comprehensive discussion in which we both expressed our deep concerns about a number of issues, but most importantly, our mutual determination for our countries to work together in partnership in order to deal with the challenges that we face. I emphasized also our strong support for upholding the universal rights and freedoms of all Egyptians, including freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and association. We also discussed the essential role of a vibrant civil society, a free press, and rule of law, and due process in a democracy.
Now, friends, those comments were made by the United States Secretary of State John Kerry yesterday in Egypt. This is a news clip from yesterday. And now, with the news that came out today and some of the comments he made about, protecting the civil rights of all people in Egypt, if it just helps write a certain lesson in history, it's going to, at least, especially when you consider this scripture for the end time that I'm going to read next out of Isaiah 19 verse 2. Lessons being written how man just cannot govern mankind without Jesus Christ. He doesn't understand. It should be really apparent. But this verse out of, again, Isaiah chapter 19, verse 2, God says through Isaiah, "And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight every one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom." That's a dual prophecy that has not been fully fulfilled yet. It's for our time, for the big fulfillment of this prophecy that we're kind of seeing unravel in front of us here, because we've just seen a situation where Egyptian has been against Egyptian. I showed some news clips a couple of months ago during the height of some of the things going on a few months ago, where in the same family, a father was taking one side and his son was taking another side. Of course, that happens with fathers and their teenage sons today, even in America and and around the world. But in something as extreme as this, it shows right inside of families this extreme neighbor against neighbor, Egyptian against Egyptian situation that's God prophesied for the end time by Isaiah in this chapter 19, verse 2. Okay, we just have a few minutes left to go on as a half-hour program tonight, which I'd like to hold it to. And we've got news related to the Ukraine crisis. The Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russia militants who want to break away from Kiev have been fighting in eastern Ukraine for more than 2 months. Scores have been killed, and thousands more are thought to have been displaced. While some of the pro-Russian militants are Ukraine citizens, others, as you'll see in this video, are being recruited from Russia. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg met a man who wished to be identified as Yun in the Russian city of Rostov. He said he was recruiting Russian volunteer fighters via the internet.
Who are the fighters in eastern Ukraine? We know that some of the pro-Russia militants are Ukrainian citizens, but not all of them. In the Russian city of Rostov, I meet Yuri. Via the internet, he's recruiting Russians to fight in Ukraine on the side of the militants. Kiev has identified this group and its website as one of the main recruiting grounds for Russian volunteers.
There is a saying, You can't do good without using your fists. Sometimes it's necessary to take up arms to protect those who need defending. We call it armed charity.
The group says it was their volunteers who tried to seize Donetsk airport last month. Dozens of fighters were killed. More than 30 bodies were repatriated to Russia.
Our job isn't just to dispatch volunteers and to coordinate their activities. It's our responsibility to bring them home, whether they're dead or alive.
The Russian volunteer group says it gets no direct support from the government here, and Moscow has repeatedly denied sending troops and military hardware across the border. But Western governments maintain that among the fighters in eastern Ukraine are professionals, which are funded, equipped and backed by Russia.
Officially, this is the only assistance Russia's been providing the people of eastern Ukraine, and it's humanitarian. On the Russian side of the border, refugees escaping the violence can get clothes and medicine and transport to temporary shelter. At a hostel nearby, many of these refugees told me they had relatives who'd stayed behind to fight the Ukrainian army. I hope my son kills 2,000 of those Kiev bandits, Robert says. If he does, I'll build a statue to him. He'll be my hero. To these refugees, talk of peace plans is empty words. There is deep suspicion here of Kiev. They're counting on Russia for protection. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Rostov, southern Russia.
And friends, for our final story tonight, kind of a crazy one out of South Korea. A South Korea soldier who killed 5 members of his own unit has been captured after a failed suicide attempt. The soldier, identified only as M.I.M., shot himself in the chest and was being sent to hospital, they said. John Sudworth reports.
Through the night, the fugitive soldier continued to hold out while a massive military operation secured the area around him. After 24 hours, the standoff came to an end. With huge media interest in the manhunt, a South Korean Defense Ministry spokesman told journalists that the 22-year-old sergeant had been captured alive. At around 5 to 3 this afternoon, Sergeant Im shot himself in the side of his upper body and was taken to hospital, he said. Guarding the demilitarized zone is considered to be one of the toughest jobs for conscripts, and there have been other incidents of soldiers turning their weapons on their own comrades. What prompted Sergeant Im to kill 5 and injure 7 members of his unit will now, of course, be the subject of an investigation. So far, there is no suspicion of any involvement by North Korea. South Korean news reports suggest the young soldier initially failed the personality test for frontline duty, but was eventually passed as fit. During the attempts to persuade him to surrender, his parents were called in to plead with him, first via a loudspeaker and then over a mobile phone thrown to him by the surrounding soldiers. I can't give specific numbers of men, this South Korean colonel told journalists, but 9 battalions were mobilized for the search operation, he said. Now that it's over, questions will once again be asked about whether enough is being done to ensure the mental well-being of those guarding one of the world's most dangerous frontiers. John Sudworth, BBC News, South Korea.
And friends, that's our report for this Monday evening. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Tuesday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.